Gene Kelly was not just a Hollywood icon. He was a man whose charm, talent, and passion for dance captivated the world. But behind the dazzling performances and unforgettable roles was a love story that few truly understood. His widow, the woman who stood beside him in his final years, held on to memories that remained hidden from the public eye for decades. Their love was not just about glitz and glamour. It was filled with quiet moments, deep conversations, and an understanding that went beyond words. When they first met, it was not an ordinary encounter. There was something about him that pulled her in, the way he carried himself, the way his eyes held stories of both joy and sorrow. To the world, he was a legend, but to her, he was simply Gene, a man with dreams, regrets, and a heart that still longed for something more. Their connection was instant, but it was not without its complications. He had lived a life full of experiences, and she was stepping into a world where the past was never really gone. People whispered, questioned, and doubted, but their bond was stronger than the noise around them. She saw sides of him that no one else did. The moments when he let his guard down, the fears he never spoke about on camera, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes crept into his soul despite the applause of millions. There were nights when he would sit in silence, lost in thought, and she wondered what ghosts from his past visited him in those moments. He had loved before, lost before, and now, with her, he had found something different, something that was not about fame but about companionship, about having someone who truly saw him beyond the Hollywood image. But even the deepest love stories are not without their shadows. There were challenges, moments of doubt, and the weight of a past that sometimes felt too heavy to carry. And yet through it all, they held on to each other, creating a world of their own, away from the flashing lights and expectations. Their love was real, raw, and filled with complexities that only they understood. And when he was gone, she was left not just with memories, but with truths that the world had never heard. Truths she chose to keep to herself for 30 long years. But why? What was it that kept her silent for so long? And what finally made her decide that now, after all this time, the world needed to hear the story of the man behind the legend? For 30 years, she carried a silence heavier than words. A silence that was not just about grief, but about something deeper, something unspoken. People often wondered why Gene Kelly's widow never stepped forward, never shared her side of the story, never revealed what it was like to love and lose a man the world adored. It wasn't that she had nothing to say, it was that the weight of what she held inside was too much to simply release into the world without reason. There were moments when she wanted to speak, times when she felt the urge to correct the narratives written by strangers who had never known the man behind the legend. But something always stopped her. Maybe it was the fear of judgment, of people twisting her words, of having to relive the pain she had spent years trying to bury. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because some stories are too precious, too painful, too personal to be shared until the right moment arrives. Every time she saw his face on the screen, smiling, dancing, lost in a world of music and movement, she felt the ache of his absence, but she also felt the burden of the things left unsaid. There were truths that had never been spoken, memories locked away like fragile glass, and questions she was never ready to answer. Did Gene Kelly ever feel truly happy in his final years? Were there regrets he carried, secrets he never shared? And what was it about their love that made her choose silence over fame, privacy over public acknowledgement? People assumed she had moved on, that time had softened the pain, that she had left the past behind. But the truth was, the past never really leaves. It lingers, it whispers, it waits, and for 30 years it waited for her to find the courage to face it. Some nights, she would sit in the quiet, surrounded by the echoes of their life together, wondering if she had made the right choice by keeping it all inside. What would people say if they knew the truth? Would they understand, or would they judge? And most importantly, would Gene have wanted her to break the silence? These thoughts haunted her, pulling her between the past and the present, between the need to protect his legacy and the desire to finally be heard. The world had moved on, but she had remained frozen in the memories of a love that was both beautiful and complicated. And as the years passed, The silence became a part of her, a shield against the questions she wasn't ready to answer. But silence is never truly empty. It is filled with all the words that were never spoken, all the emotions that were never expressed, all the truths that were left behind. And now, after 3 decades, that silence was beginning to crack. Something had changed. Something had awakened inside her, pushing her toward the moment she had spent years avoiding. The question was, what was it? And why now? Fame is like a bright light. It shines on those who stand in its glow, making them appear larger than life, untouchable, almost immortal. But behind that light, there are shadows, the kind that no one sees, the kind that only those closest to the person truly understand. Gene Kelly was a legend to the world, but to his widow, he was something much more complicated. There was a side of him that never made it to the screens, a part of him that remained hidden behind the carefully crafted image of the charming, effortless dancer. The world saw his confidence, his energy, his perfection, but she saw the exhaustion, the quiet moments when the weight of his past settled on his shoulders like an invisible burden. There were times when he would sit in their home, lost in thought, his fingers tracing the edge of a coffee cup, his mind somewhere far away. She never wanted to ask, but she always wondered, was he thinking about the past, about the people he had lost, about the mistakes he never spoke of? He had lived a life before her, a life filled with love, loss, and moments that shaped him into the man she fell in love with. But there were parts of that life he never fully shared. She could see it in his eyes sometimes, a flicker of something unresolved, a sadness that even time hadn't erased. And yet he never spoke of it. Maybe he thought she wouldn't understand, or maybe he didn't want to burden her with the ghosts he carried, but she felt them anyway. It was in the way he sometimes hesitated before answering certain questions, in the way he changed the subject when old memories surfaced, in the way he held her a little tighter on some nights, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. And as much as she loved him, as much as she cherished every moment they had together, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were things left unsaid between them. She wondered if he had regrets, if he wished he had done things differently, if he ever thought about the things he never had the chance to say. There were moments when she wanted to ask, to push past the silence, to make him open up about the parts of himself he kept hidden, but she never did. Maybe she was afraid of the answers. Maybe she was afraid that if she asked, she would have to face the truth that even the deepest love couldn't erase a lifetime of memories that didn't include her. And now, after all these years, those questions still haunted her. What had he kept from her? What had he taken with him that she would never know? And why, even after all this time, did it still feel like there were pieces of him she had never truly understood? There are moments in life that stay frozen in time, moments that never fade no matter how many years pass. For Gene Kelly's widow, those moments weren't just the ones filled with love and laughter, but also the ones that held unanswered questions, silent pauses, and the weight of things left unsaid. She had spent years living beside him, loving him, understanding him in ways the world never could, but even with all that closeness, there were still things about him that remained a mystery. He had a way of keeping certain parts of himself locked away, of tucking away the emotions he didn't want to share, of carrying burdens in silence. And she had always respected that, never pushing, never demanding more than what he was willing to give. But now, looking back, she wondered, what was he protecting? What truths had he kept hidden, not just from the world, but from her? There had been moments when she caught glimpses of something deeper, moments when he seemed almost on the verge of saying something important, only to stop himself at the last second. She remembered the nights when he would sit in the dim light, staring at nothing in particular, his mind lost in a place she couldn't reach. She had always assumed those moments were simply reflections of a long life lived, memories surfacing that were too painful or too personal to share. But what if they were more than that? What if there was something he had wanted to tell her, but never could? She thought back to their last conversations, trying to piece together any clues, any hints that might reveal what had been left unsaid. There had been times when he had spoken about the past, about the people he had loved and lost, but always in fragments, never the full picture. It was as if he was leaving gaps, as if some parts of his story were too heavy to relive, even with her. And now, after all these years, those gaps haunted her. She had lived with him, loved him, and yet she still felt as though there were parts of him she had never truly known. And the worst part was, she would never get the chance to ask. The questions would remain unanswered, the mysteries forever unsolved, but even in the silence, she could feel the weight of what had been left behind. The memories, the secrets, the emotions that had never been spoken aloud, they were all still there, lingering in the spaces he used to fill, whispering to her in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to remember. And as she sat with those thoughts, she couldn't help but wonder, was she ever truly meant to know, or had Jean taken those truths with him for a reason? For 30 years, she had carried the weight of silence, living in a world that had moved on, while she remained trapped in the echoes of the past. She had learned to live with the unanswered questions, the quiet moments where she could almost hear his voice, the lingering presence of a man who had once filled her life with love and mystery. But something had changed. Something deep inside her had begun to stir, pushing against the walls she had built around herself, whispering that it was time to speak, time to share, time to let the world see the truth she had guarded for so long. But why now? That was the question she kept asking herself. What had shifted? What had made the silence suddenly feel unbearable after all these years? It wasn't just about missing him. She had missed him every single day since he had been gone. It wasn't just about the memories. Those had always been with her, woven into the fabric of her existence. No, this was something different. It was as if the world itself had changed, as if time had finally caught up with her, urging her to break the silence before it was too late. Maybe it was because she had grown tired of watching others tell his story, shaping his legacy with half-truths and assumptions, painting a picture that wasn't entirely real. Maybe it was because she had reached an age where she no longer cared about what people would think, no longer feared the judgment or the scrutiny that had once held her back. Or maybe it was because deep down, she knew that if she didn't speak now, she never would. And so for the first time in 30 years, she allowed herself to remember, not just the man the world adored, but the man she had loved. She thought of the way he would hum absent-mindedly while reading a book, the way his eyes would light up when he spoke about dance, the way he had held her hand during quiet moments, as if grounding himself in something real. She thought of the laughter, the arguments, the tenderness, the unspoken words that had always lingered between them. And with every memory, she felt the silence cracking, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. The truth about their love, about his struggles, about the things he had kept hidden, and the things he had wanted the world to know. And as she prepared to finally speak, to share what had been locked away for so long, she couldn't help but wonder, would the world be ready to listen, or would they only hear what they wanted to hear, just as they always had? She had spent years wondering what would happen if she ever broke her silence. Would people understand? Would they listen with open hearts, or would they twist her words, turning them into something they were never meant to be? She had seen it happen before, stories reshaped, facts blurred, memories distorted until the truth no longer resembled what had really happened. And that was what had always stopped her, the fear that if she spoke, she would lose control of the one thing she had left, the truth about the man she had loved. But now, as she sat there, ready to reveal the words that had been trapped inside her for decades, she realized something. This was not about the world, not about how they would react, not about whether they would accept or reject her story. This was about him, about Jean, about the man behind the legend, the man who had lived, loved, struggled, and carried his own secrets in ways no one had ever truly understood. And most of all, it was about the part of him that had been lost in time, hidden beneath the weight of his fame, buried beneath the expectations the world had placed on him. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to remember him not as the star everyone admired, but as the person she had shared her life with. The world had always seen him as larger than life, a man who could command a room with nothing more than a smile, who moved with an effortless grace that made everything seem easy. But they had never seen him in his quietest moments, when he was simply Jean, The man who carried regrets he never voiced, who had dreams he never had the chance to fulfill, who sometimes longed for something beyond the bright lights and applause. They didn't know how he struggled with the weight of his own legacy, how he sometimes wondered if he had given too much of himself to the world, and not enough to the people who mattered most. They didn't know about the moments when he would sit in silence, staring out the window, as if searching for something he could never quite find. And maybe, just maybe, that was the part of him she was meant to share, the part of him that had been overlooked, the part of him that made him human. She had spent so long protecting his memory, keeping the truth locked away as if it belonged to her alone. But now, she understood, some stories are meant to be told, not for the world's sake, but for the sake of the person who lived them. And as she opened her mouth to finally speak, she felt the weight of 30 years lift, knowing that whatever happened next, the truth would finally be free.